Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Christian Capitalist Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Brandon Hatton, who's in Atlanta this morning and comes to us from Conscious Wealth Decisions. He's an author and a thought leader in the area of wealth management, and we're delighted to have him here on the podcast today. Good morning, Brandon.
Morning, Rich.
Thank
Great
you.
to be
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad to see you. Well, Brendan, as we've been talking this morning a little bit to get ready to show, we've talked about how our audience includes a lot of folks from all over the nation, some of which may be familiar with your book and the cards, others who may not have heard of this before. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do for a living and how you got there?
here. Well, at its very core, our business, Conscious Wealth Investments, is an investment company. So we manage money for families. And that's like the simplest, that's probably, Rich, the simplest way to say it. But how we do that is very important for us. The intentionality we put that behind it. And by being so intentional about it, the way that our practice has expanded to incorporate other dimensions has really changed. Well, it's just created work that we enjoy, right? So, a big part of our work, besides, well, so I should say, we decided early in the days. I started working for one of those big firms, uh, named by like three guys. I like to joke Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, if you remember that. So
Yeah.
I worked for one of those really big firms, and I learned a lot, and I met good people. But I realized that wasn't the paradigm I wanted to work in. I didn't want to work in a situation where the idea was if you give me money, I'll give you more. One, that very much commoditized me and it made me to be an untruthful person because I can't always give somebody more money with the money they've given me. And it also, I noticed when working there that not only did I live in fear, in a sense of scarcity, our marketing towards our clients and the way that we attracted clients was making them feel fearful. Right. And so I didn't really enjoy that. And I said, oh, how can I, over the years, just kept on thinking, how can I create and serve people to help them invest in a way that'll support them during their life, but also doesn't support, but supports abundance,
Mm-hmm.
helps them feel like not only do they have enough, but they are enough and they can go out the world and do good things. And that they'll work with me because they believe I do a good job, not because they're afraid that if they don't work with me, things are going to go to
Mm-hmm.
hell. So that's kind of how we kind of transformed and where we are today, 15 years after I started, which I never would imagine the work I'm doing. I can't even imagine like the first day that somebody said, you're going to be doing what you're doing now, where I co-facilitate with a licensed therapist with families and help them basically talk about whatever they're not talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so people say, well, I bet you that gets into a lot of things. Well, yeah, but all roads lead to Rome, right? So we may be talking about money and we may be, the topic that I may be called in is to talk about the family money or an inheritance or what the estate plan is going to look like. But it always gets us to some other issues that are at hand, some misunderstandings, some lack of communication, some narratives that were once true but are no longer true. And we get to help families untangle those narratives and be in the support of helping them become more loving, kind, and generous. And so it's really a two-part. We have these two services that we offer, and sometimes wealth management works with this facilitation and consulting side, and then sometimes they're separate.
But I love the fact that you've tied them together because in so many cases with families who are trying to manage the wealth, regardless of how many zeros are in those accounts, so many times that families who are trying to manage these accounts come into conflict. What are some of the things that in the process of co-facilitating these family sessions, what are some of the things that you kind of see consistently that lead families to disagree before you kind of have this breakthrough?
So the number one polarity that we come up against, is I'm going to tell my kids everything about our money, or I'm going to tell my kids nothing about my money.
Uh, yeah.
And the fear is, well, if I tell them everything, then they're going to become spoiled, entitled, lazy, won't want to work, and they'll feel like they have a right to it all. Or I'm going to tell them nothing, and that's going to protect them. And I feel that neither of those are really true. Uh, for most cases, right? Like there could be truth in each of those, but they're extremes of a polarity. And what we want to do is help families, particularly where the sponsoring party, the people who hire us are the parents. And we may be brought in by the younger generation, but the parents are the ones who are sponsoring it and hiring us to do the work. We want to help them understand why are they where they are on that spectrum of tell them nothing or everything. And what if your beliefs around where you are not true? And can we give you more range along that spectrum? And what are some steps besides telling them everything? Right? Like,
Right.
or in telling them nothing. What are
Yeah.
some steps that we can take along the way that everybody's comfortable with? And that's the number one across the board, the number one thing we see.
Isn't that something, Brandon? I love to hear that. First, for two reasons. The first is that time and time again, I hear families who are trying to have this conversation. I'm in my 50s. I'm Generation X. My wife is roughly my age, and our kids are now all in their 20s. As we talk about wealth management and how we're going to manage the money in our families, kind of the unseen people at the table are my parents and my wife's parents. And because what we bring to the table as parents is informed by what happened to us when we were kids. There's this kind of generational notion to communication. And if one family always talks about money and the other family never talks about money, right off the bat, you've got this issue that you've just pointed to. So I'm delighted to hear that this is not only something that you see a lot, but it is something that you're comfortable addressing.
So, one of the things I stumbled across when writing the book Conscious Wealth is that we all have money memories,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I started to uncover the book was really healing for me because I started to uncover my own money memories. And what was super in those money memories, and we like to give a very clear example of what that could be, is my grandparents lived through the Depression, right? And
Right.
so those were
Mine
their
too.
memories,
Yeah.
and that will impact them the rest of their lives. And we see it, and you say, why do my grandparents use a cutting board that's 20 years old? And we know why.
Right.
So what was interesting when I started to uncover my money memories and then put it in a book and publish it is my family goes, none of that's true. And I was like, really? Because it seemed really true to me.
Yeah.
Um, and what's important about our money memories, which I had, which was a thing that my family and I kind of went through once it was all published, is it doesn't matter what's true. What is truth, anyways, when it comes to our memories? What's important is what we believe and what we're acting upon. And the next question for myself was, is it true anymore? I used to live in a sphere of poverty. Um, now, in hindsight, that may have been a result of a very heavy-handed way of my parents telling me to turn off the lights.
Right. Or close the door when the air conditioning's on.
Yes. Well, I wish we had air conditioning. We didn't live in the
Couldn't afford
South.
it, right?
We didn't live in the South.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a very much a luxury up there. But yeah, but what I have to question now is that still true? And if it's not true, then what am I free to do? You know?
Yeah. One of
Yeah.
the other reasons I'm so glad to hear us talking about family and money memories is that I'm blessed later this year to be marrying three couples. And as I go through premarital counseling, as a pastor, as I go through premarital counseling, we talk about three subjects in our discussions: family, money, and love. And what do those things mean? And money is so important because, in my experience, and based on the things I've read, I'm very interested to hear your feedback on that. That one of the biggest stressors on a marriage is money, and how it's communicated, how it's discussed, how it's earned, and how it's spent. So that you're kind of reinforcing that because family comes first. Everybody kind of comes to the table from different backgrounds, but then money is informed by all of that. What do you think about money and marriage and how those things work together?
Well, what you said made me think of a quote, and you're always free to edit anything I say, but there is there is an expression out there that says everything is about sex but sex. And this idea for the mass population that we put all these things on sex except for the idea of love and a true union of two human beings experiencing each other at the highest levels. And I think that's I don't need to comment on whether I think it's true or not, but I think there's some truth into that. And I think sometimes if you haven't done the work, if you haven't really questioned your money memories, if you haven't explored um, what you truly want out of life and try to take your ego away from it all, you could say everything is about money but money, you know. And so
Oh, yeah.
you can say, hey, um, sure, I want. Somebody may say outwardly, I want money because I want to be rich, or I want to have this lifestyle, or I want to have this house, or I want to have this car. But at the truth, it may just be I might not feel like I'm good enough unless I can prove to everybody I made a lot of money,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And um, I can certainly say for myself that that was probably some underlying beliefs I had early in my business. I just knew I had to make it. I knew I had to be successful, and I was going to do anything, and I had to prove to everyone. And I only reached a certain level of success, and then it just cut off. I couldn't get any higher. I hit a wall because if it wasn't sustainable, it wasn't life giving, it wasn't amplified enough that you just get stuck. So, um, as I mentioned before, all roads lead to Rome, and I do think that it's really important, not only during a marriage but throughout it, to have conversations about money, and then also ask, is this really what it's about?
This is really what it's about. So that's a perfect segue. Speaking of all roads leading to Rome, that's a perfect segue to talk about St. Paul writing a letter to his lieutenant, his kind of right hand man, Timothy, back in the early days of the church. Paul's in prison in Rome and writing since all roads lead to Rome, that was true 2,000 years ago, right? So Paul's in prison in Rome and writing a letter to Timothy about how to manage the church that Paul's left Timothy behind to run. And it is the theme of the Christian capitalist. It's right there on the very first page of the book in his Paul's first letter to Timothy. He says, "For those who are rich in the present age, tell them not to brag, but to focus on sharing their good works and sharing their riches, so they can focus on building a foundation for the life that really is life." And I think what you just said about having difficulty finding value in success is exactly what Paul was talking to Timothy about. That focusing on simply the acquisition of material goods isn't really what God wants us to do, or what's going to be satisfying, whether you believe in God or not. There has to be some kind of higher purpose. As I was reading through the information on your website, I noticed that one of the things y'all focus on in advising families is purpose-driven investing, or finding a purpose to that. Can you tell us about what those conversations are like?
Before I do, can I go back to Paul for a minute?
Of course. He's one of our favorite saints here on the show.
All right. So when I came up with the title of Conscious Wealth for my book, really what I wanted to do was work with polarities, or these two very opposite things. And this idea of consciousness is can be so uh, um, difficult to grasp, but it's really just embracing the idea that we're spiritual beings, and that this is not all there is, and that there's some otherness out there. And then wealth for most people is this idea of money, which is the most worldly thing we have, right? Like, man created money. It doesn't exist in any other form of nature. And so I wanted to mash these two things together to say, how do we exist, in the words of St. Paul, to be in the world but not of it? And how do we navigate this? Because this is our task always, whether it's with money, with life, with work. Um, because if you have to go out in the world and pretend it's real, or you're going to get hit by a car, right? Or it's like things are going to be really bad. But
Right.
if you think this is all there is, then it's a profound disappointment, and what's the point? And so I like, I was fortunate enough when I was young to visit Ephesus, and
Wow.
yeah, and I liked St. Paul, and he was probably my favorite when I was studying a lot of Christianity as a kid.
That's really cool. So, what did you take away from that? And as you kind of develop this conscious wealth investment company and having these conversations. How did Paul kind of help you navigate that?
Well, I think personally, the way that it really helped navigate it for me was I've always lived well below my means. And not because Dave Ramsey told me to do it or like it's a smart economic thing to do. I've just always been comfortable not owning a lot of things. And so I noticed early in the business when people had houses to pay for, watches to buy, or other stuff like that, I never had any pressure in my 20s or 30s about making more money. I never had to do anything for the money.
Hmm.
And I lost really big bonuses sometimes in the structures that are created, in the incentive structures that are created in some of these companies. Or I didn't lose them, I didn't win them, I should say, or I didn't get them
Right.
because because I wanted to sleep at night, because I wanted to be able to say I did the right thing by other people. And in our business, there's always this thing where you just don't know what to do. You just can't figure out what to do. Is this the right thing? Is it not? And then inevitably, somebody wise will ask you, well, what would you do for your mom? What would you do for your family? Like, what would the decision you'd make? What would you do for yourself? Okay. All right. Now I've got the decision. So, me being able to live a non material life um, has been has been very helpful for me and has been freeing. It's a bit of a juxtaposition of where I am now. I'm moving into a home on Sunday, so 6 days from now, 5 days from now, and I literally don't have a fork to move into it. Like, because so many times in my life have I given everything away, and now I'm moving from Miami, and it's like I've got to start from scratch, and there's going to be a little bit of Steve Jobs of me sitting on the floor alone, like on a yoga mat, and slowly grow
That's
into this. But
hysterical.
it's really served me well. I've never felt pressure. I've never been under leverage or anything like that.
That's really cool, Brandon. All right, so I got a couple of follow-up questions on that. First of all, your scarf this morning is very cool. I like it, but I
Thank
thought
you.
when you said you don't have any forks, it's because you're trying to eat Moroccan style, which is what I
Yeah.
would say when I don't have a fork.
Yes. Yes.
So you're
Yes.
moving from Miami, and where are you going?
I'm staying in Atlanta. I'm coming back to Atlanta where I've been for a long time. I left for a
Gotcha.
couple of years, and I'm on my way back.
Gotcha. So, congratulations on your
Thank you.
move. That's exciting. Uh,
Thank you.
One of the concepts you just hit on, though, because you mentioned you've given away so much over your life that you now don't even have a fork, that we hit upon with one of our recent guests, who's the fundraiser for a nonprofit, is what how do you know when you're encouraging people, as I do, when you're encouraging people to give generously? And in some cases, as we say in the book, give till it hurts. How do you know when people are giving too much and putting themselves in a position of potential financial insecurity because of their generosity? Have you seen examples of that either in your own life or in the families that you work with through conscious wealth investment?
Well, one of my clients says you can't outgive God, which I think is really interesting.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. Um, I have seen that before. It's not common. And there's a lot. Um, hmm. I think there's sometimes you want to prove your worthiness by earning so much money. Sometimes it could be the opposite too,
Mhm.
as you could give so much. I don't know if, I don't know. It's a tough case. I don't see it often. Here's what I can tell you, because that's a tough one to answer. When clients say, how much should I give? We typically recommend that they give a percent. And we'd say a percent of either your overall financial net worth or your income. And um, and I say that because that's literally what I do.
Mhm.
And I can't, it could be different. Like if you're retired, it may not make sense to do of your income.
Right.
And you kind of just have to, figure out what works best for you or what makes sense. But I have found that right hand and my teammate, who works with all of our clients and also helps serve me, will say, "Hey, it's December. You said you were going to give this much of this or that, and so we're going to, this one's the higher one, so you're going to give this much, and we're going to put it in a donor advised fund, and I just need you to sign this form." And so we've completely automated it. The only option is, are we going to go higher? Like, do you
Mhm.
want to do more this year? And I feel like that's a really great place to start, um, because I don't think giving to when it, maybe like you'd say, oh, well, why don't we just see what feels good this year? What feels good in December? Not much.
Yeah, right.
It's
Exactly.
a tough month.
Especially if you've had a tough year.
Yeah. Yeah. So that seems like a good consistent way for us to recommend. And we have clients that say, yeah, that sounds great to me. We'll just do this.
It's
And we meet our
interesting.
clients where they are. There's zero judgment. Like, if it's whatever it is, okay, this is a system, let's follow it.
One of the things that my wife Rebecca and I have been married 26 years, coming up on 27 here in June. One of the things that we have historically done is what you just described with your business associate, and that is set aside December as a time to catch all. And we have in many years done that on the afternoon of December 31st to kind of get it in at the end of the year and make sure that we capture it for that particular year. And hey, what did we forget? But in recent years, as December 31st has gotten busier with travel and the occasional party, we find that harder and harder to do. So one of our New Year's resolutions for 2025 is to spread that giving out throughout the year. So we don't wait till December because of what you just said. Sometimes December can be a really difficult month to kind of catch it all together. How do you talk to your clients about giving as a practice throughout the year, or kind of the diligence of giving to avoid that, if at all?
Yeah, that's the real big challenge in society now, because we are. I do like the structure of a donor advised fund. I have one myself. I actually made 2 grants this morning.
Oh,
Just
great.
drinking. Yeah, I was drinking coffee, and I said, you know what? Like, I just got to get this money out in the world. And the problem with the donor advised fund is all of the tax incentive is giving it on the front end, putting it in there.
Hmm.
There's no tax incentive on getting it out. That's where the intrinsic incentive needs to come from. And I've been, and I just, some reason it came to me like, there's just too much in there. Get it out.
Good for
Um,
you. That's awesome. Put it out in the world, man. I love that.
yeah, it's trapped energy, and it needs to flow. So, I think it's a tough thing to do. I think there are a lot of barriers to giving. And and there's a lot of people who create these barriers, in my belief. I don't know why, but their barriers are created and they sound really clever, but they're not always true. For
Mm,
instance, oh, can't give to a charity with overhead. Why not? Why
right,
not? They have to support themselves. They should be paid, or
right.
I can't give to a charity because they don't run it like a business. They're a nonprofit. Nonprofit is a tax status. It is not a way to run a business. I only want to hit the root causes. I have to teach a man to fish. Well, what? You know what? What if they're too hungry to fish? Like it's a stupid analogy, but like
Right.
seriously, like it is not just one. There's multi levels of approaching any problem, and there's alleviating suffering, there's creating opportunity, and there's creating beauty, right? And I just kind of made those up in the moment, but those are like 3 things that we can look at, and they all deserve a part of a plan. And if we just say, well, I always got to get to the root, I always got to get to the root, some things just don't have root causes that we can solve.
Jesus said something very pertinent to all this, Brandon. And by the way, I hope that when we go back in the show notes, Jess is taking notes, as am I. We want to capture what you said because it was beautiful. Um,
Thank you.
Jesus said something very similar to this effect, though, in talking about the root cause. We will always have the poor. We will always
Always,
have the poor. And so
yeah.
the root cause may be the human condition itself. And if you look for root causes, you're going to keep looking. Your entire life. Sometimes you just got to go to the effect and take care of what's in front of you.
Hmm. I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah.
So, having said that, one of the things you just mentioned for our audience who ranges not only geographically, as we discussed earlier, but in terms of age and experience. Some of our listeners may not be familiar with the donor advised fund. Would you kind of provide a layman's definition of that and kind of what the issues are that surround it?
Sure. I mean, I think they're a wonderful tool. So I'll just show you, I'll use myself as an example. I have money in the stock market, and let's say I buy Google and it goes up in money, it goes up in value. And then I want to give money to charity. Well, I could sell that Google, pay taxes on the gain, and then get a tax deduction for giving it to my favorite nonprofit.
Good.
Or I can take those Google shares in whole, put them in a structure called a donor advised fund, which is kind of like my own personal charity account, kind of like that. They will sell it. And because they're a nonprofit, they don't pay the taxes. And I get all of that money. I don't have to pay taxes. It all goes to a nonprofit. And I also get the tax deduction for it.
Gotcha.
And so it's a tax efficient way of giving for anyone who owns equities. And there's very little limitations on who you give to. You can give to just about any charity as long as it's not self serving and it's in the United States. You can give to charities outside the United States. It's a little bit more difficult,
Hmm.
but it's possible. It's like a foundation without all the paperwork.
Gotcha.
Um,
That's great. And so, as a general rule of thumb, when you talk about giving to charities, these are organizations that the IRS has said are tax exempt, 501c3.
that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
great.
Yep.
Great. So, you mentioned deploying some funds from your donor advised fund today. Do you want to talk a little bit about who you decided to give to and give a shout out to the charities you supported this morning?
Sure. So I mentioned Alleviating Suffering and Creating Beauty. So one was Mission Atlanta. When I came back to Georgia, um, when I came back to Atlanta, you just see a lot of homeless people,
Yeah.
and it's a real issue here.
Yeah.
And I don't give to homeless people on the street.
Mm.
It's just not my way of giving. So I had my teammates say, "Hey, set me up some appointments," and I met with Mission and Covenant House. They're two people that deal with homelessness. Covenant House is a beautiful group because they work with children, or I should say, young adults. So I created a grant for them, and then I also created a grant for Flux Projects that does a lot of art in our city,
Oh,
and
cool.
beautiful, curated, often public art, so that anyone can see it. They're not in museums. I mean, they can be in museums, but oftentimes they're in parks or on the side of a building, and they're made available to everyone. And I think that's a really important part. Like beauty feeds us too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's first of all, we'll make sure that we put a link to Mission Atlanta and Flex Projects in the show
yeah.
notes because folks
Or
who,
Covenant too, please.
oh
I
yeah,
just got to call. Yeah, please.
yeah, I wrote down Covenant House as well. But we'll put all
Great.
three. For those who are listening to this podcast, we want to, including the Sanders family, we want to support those, given your the reasons you just provided for supporting them too.
Wonderful.
But Rebecca and I lived in Atlanta for nearly 30 years and raised our children there. And I agree with what you just said about the number of homeless folks who have just increased so dramatically. We talk about this in the book a little bit from experiences that I had in the spring of 2023. It just seems like, regardless of the economic conditions in the city or the nation, for whatever reason, homelessness is on the rise in our major cities, including Atlanta. To one point, I was driving over to Emory to teach a class there, and at the intersection of Jimmy Carter, near the Carter Center, so Freedom Parkway and Boulevard, right near the hospital. Each one of the corners of that intersection, and for those of y'all who haven't been there before, these are two lanes divided, then two lanes, and so it's a big intersection. But there are homeless folks at each corner of those, walking in between the rows of two cars, asking for money at each corner of the intersection. It's tough. Frankly, it's tough to carry enough cash to go through that intersection on a regular basis because the folks there are working. It's so hard, but you know that they're destitute in order to be pushed to that bring. But I want to ask you something because this is something I struggle with as well. When folks come up to the window of my car, I try and give them something. But I'm hesitant to recommend that to the other members of our family, especially my wife and daughter, because I worry about their security. When you mentioned that that's not kind of the way you give, what's your rationale for not providing money to folks who are standing there at the window of the car? Because I'm very much on the fence about this, man.
Well, I started my professional career teaching in Egypt. I was part of a team that started a school there, and then I lived in Lebanon and I lived in Brazil as a school teacher,
Oh,
high school history and economics. And I had to come. And my dad owned a restaurant in Delhi in downtown Cleveland. So even though we lived in the suburbs and I went to some pretty nice schools, really nice schools, I've kind of been confronted with poverty a lot through my life and had to
mhm.
make peace with it. And there are services within the city of Atlanta that are creating pathways for people to eat, find shelter. Are they good enough? No, but they're there. They're up against big tidal waves of resistance or
Yeah,
economic forces, but they do exist. And I think my dollars going to them are much more impactful, and they go further and then working than giving directly. That's how I've made peace with it. Um, if I'm in a good frame of mind, I say a prayer to them. If I feel like if I can make eye contact, I will say hello, ask them how they're doing. But and oftentimes they they just want to like a lot of them just want to like not. I'm sure they also want money. There's no doubt, but a lot of them are very happy to be seen.
absolutely, and be recognized. That is the modern term we use is marginalized, and even a
Yeah,
smile or a recognition or a good morning is
yeah,
enough to bring them off the margin. In
yeah.
many cases. Yeah, it's interesting. Rebecca and I were in Times Square in New York in December to celebrate the Christian Capitalist getting #1 on Amazon. We had a billboard in Times Square. It was a neat
That's wonderful.
marketing thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun. But needless to say, just like these intersections we were talking about in Atlanta, plenty of homeless folks who are asking the tourists, including us, for financial support. I kind of took to mind what you were just talking about. Instead of carrying around a bunch of dollar bills, whenever we would go get a bagel for breakfast or a sandwich at lunch, whatever we didn't finish, I would just wrap up and carry with me. And everybody was so happy when I would say, "Well, here's a half of a bagel, and it's clean. It's not like we gnawed on it or anything. Here's a half of a bagel, or here's a half of a sandwich." And everyone just appreciated the generosity, even though it wasn't financial, except for one guy. And I said, "Hey, here's a half of a sandwich my wife couldn't eat." And he was like, "I don't want your sandwich, man. I want some money."
hmm,
I'm like, "Okay,
that's
well, I'm
fair.
sorry, I don't have that, but I got a half a
Yeah,
sandwich." He was like, "I'm hungry. I need to go buy something." I'm like, "Well, here's what I have for you." And he
yeah,
ended up not taking it, but the guy behind him was like, "I'll take that."
yeah.
Classic, like New York deli style, right? Let's get back though, because that reminds me of something you said at the outset of our discussion today, and that is supporting abundance. One of the favorite parables that we have in the book and that we talk about here on the show is Jesus standing there in front of a crowd of people who are all impoverished, and probably for Americans, impoverished to the level of what you saw in Egypt and India. Nothing close to what we see in America. Because one of my theories is that even the poor here in the United States are rich compared to the poor in India and other countries around the world. Because we just, as Americans, have a kind of a level set of wealth that other nations do not. But Jesus said, "Look at the sparrows. Look at the sparrows. God takes care of them. They don't worry. They don't wonder where the next meal is coming from. God takes care of them. Will He not care for you anymore because you're His children?" And the answer is, of course, yes. I know folks, in particular, one of our friends in our neighborhood, who have taken that parable so seriously that she has a tattoo of a sparrow on her foot. Just a
Hmm.
reminder, God's always going to take care of her. So I love the fact that conscious wealth investment has focused on supporting abundance. Tell us how that comes into play as you're advising families, because I love that concept.
Sure. So we believe that the way we invest money can support abundance, the feeling that you have enough. And the way we talk about investments can do that, the way we market it, the way we talk to our clients. So, for instance, if you are in a bunch of opaque funds or in leveraged products, or you look at your statement and you have no idea what it means, then how would you ever feel a sense of security or safety that you could go out in the world? Because then all you do is you just go to the bottom line. So we're a big proponent of direct investing. Investing is investing in companies, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
companies that invest in companies, right? So
Right,
we
like
want
a
to
classic
be,
index fund, right?
yeah, which is a valid way to invest, but it's not the way we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody looks at a statement of ours, they'll say, "Oh, I actually have investments. I don't have like the average bond fund probably has, I don't know, 10, 20,000 different bonds. We
Wow.
don't have 10, 20,000 different bonds. When we're buying a bond for a client, we buy a specific bond, we do the research on it, and if they say, hey, bonds are down this month, say, yeah, but you have a bond in X, Y, and Z company, and they're not going anywhere. So they're going to pay your money. And so creating a sense of transparency and clarity in what they own and why they own it is really can create, is a way to cultivate abundance, right? It gets a
Mm-hmm.
person a long way towards that. Um, Avoiding leverage, I spoke of a bit before. We really try to avoid leverage in our investments unless it's a portion of our investments that are particularly high risk, right? I think that's really, really key for our clients. And so following this idea of knowing what you own, why you own it, and then understanding like what you can expect in terms of cash flow is seems really simple. It
Yeah,
is simple. It is the basics of investing, but you go out there and 9 out of 10 people aren't doing it. You know,
yeah.
it's all fun based. The other thing we do differently is we actually invest the money. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Like we don't pay people in New York to do it or in some other city to do it. We know all of our investors and we are the ones buying and selling for them. And you might ask, well, why would that matter? Like those guys all have PhDs and I do not. And no one on my team does or our investment committee does. But all of those really smart people who are making decisions have are just farther extrapolations from you and your money, just getting farther and farther away. And they don't not only they cannot care about their investors because they don't know them. So
Mm-hmm.
all they can care about are their shareholders who they invest for, or who are like, and they have to serve their shareholders, um, and that's and keeping their lights on. Where so in 2008, 2009, the largest financial crisis, the largest investment houses knew exactly what was happening.
Right.
They knew what was happening because it was on their books.
Yeah.
And if they told their investors, they would go under. So they didn't tell their investors. And they all sat there, or they had to do it on their own. So uh, by in house management, we're not always going to be right. But we're going to be serving our clients and not shareholders or other people that we've never met.
Right, and that aren't directly, fiduciary, I guess, responsibility. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your clients. That's not always the case. Um, the Brandon, I just love to hear about your investment philosophy. And for the life of me, this morning I was racing out the door to come get everything set up for our podcast, and I was going to grab some of those cards
Oh yeah.
that talk about conscious wealth decisions. Maybe we can get to that on the next time you join us. But talk to us a little bit about why you designed that. It's a very unique approach, and I just love the way that it's kind of made it more accessible to have these kinds of conversations.
We are in the midst of the largest wealth transfer of all time. You said that your parents are baby boomers, right?
Right.
And so we're in the largest transfer of wealth probably on earth. And all of those 80, 90, whatever trillion dollars that will be coming down have the possibility to make us more loving, kind, generous, more equitable society, or they can help us become more fearful and entrenched in our old thoughts and our old ways. And I believe the way to help open that up and to create more, um, to make it more life, this wealth transfer more life giving, is to have conversations about money. And we're asking older older generations to do something that is antithetical to what they believe, which is to talk about money.
Yeah.
That's kind of a hard thing.
Yeah.
And so we created a card deck. We created a game with questions to sit around the table, and it can be for any amongst. It could be for anyone. It doesn't have to be from one generation to the next. It could be intergenerational. And ask questions about money, such as, "What's your biggest money memory? What does a good inheritance mean to you?" And just start to open up, because we can't always be there. Our facilitation service is very limited in scope. There's only so much we can do. So
Right.
we're putting these cards out there. We will. I'll ask my team to get you a link to the digital card so people can just download them for free. Some of your listeners can download them for free.
Oh, cool.
We'll have that. But it's been a fun project we've had.
What kind of response are you getting from folks? I have a friend who I just went through a couple of cards with, and the first one we happened to open up, and maybe the first one in the deck was share your first memory about money.
Yeah.
And mine was positive. I remember saving quarters from my allowance and going to buy baseball cards back when there was a big stick of bubble gum in the baseball
Yeah.
cards,
Cool.
right back in
Cool.
the
That's
70s.
really neat.
My friend's memory was negative, and it basically was like, I remember we never had enough, and so it was really interesting having that discussion. But how important that first memory can be. I just love that question.
Thank you.
What are the kinds of responses you get from folks who are going through these cards and having these discussions?
Well, I think you nailed it. That is our favorite question, and that really helps people kind of see the narrative that they've told themselves over the years about money. And so your friend's was very negative, but that doesn't mean it's negative now. Because of that negative experience, he may have reacted to that in a different way, and it's all very positive now.
Yeah.
But uncovering that narrative or those money memories, and people are like, "Oh, I see." It can allow for a lot of enlightening conversations and moments, and that's why we like them so much.
That's good. So I saw one of the as we draw our conversation to a close today, I saw that one of the things that y'all talk about in your investment firm there is the one statement, and those are in all capitals,
Yeah.
ONE. What does that mean? What does that refer to?
So the one statement is with this idea of creating abundance, cultivating abundance. If you give a client a 500 or even a 50-page financial plan, they're not going to read it. We have them, we give them, but we want to put it all on one page, or at least like one document, which might be 4 or 5 pages. And my team, they'll come to me with one statements, and I say the same thing to them, and they're great, they're amazing, and they make fun of me for these things. They say, I always say, "You're burying the lead, put it on top, and let the page breathe more." Like, let the page breathe more. How can we let somebody look at a page and not feel nervous, but be like, "Oh, there's so much space on this page. I realize these are really," and that's kind of my superpower is, hey, I can write 50 pages, but I can tell you in 5 sentences. And if you can distill that down for them, then it doesn't become this mysterious thing that they're handing off to somebody else and just hoping that they take care of it. But they say, "Oh, I understand. I'm part of this now." And
Hmm.
so that's what our one statement does, is take really large documents and put them into really small, clear, succinct ones.
I love that, and that is a superpower.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is in those one statements? How is giving typically treated? Is it in terms of, hey, you ought to set up a donor advised fund, or is it more general than that?
Giving can be anything. Giving can be supporting family members. Like, we'll have clients who are like, "Hey, right now I just have to get my parents uh, through the next stage of life,"
Oh wow,
right?
yeah.
Um, and giving, like, I think the highest form of giving is being a human being who speaks the truth and thinks the truth. Like, so, and lives that existence. So, and then we'll also find, or being a good parent, right?
Hmm.
And then we'll also find we have clients who run nonprofits who have um, social enterprises where they're creating companies that uplift people. So just opening companies, not because they need the money, but because they want to make jobs for people,
Yeah.
So it can
Yeah.
be any of that.
I love that. One of our first guests is a business professor at Notre Dame and one of the founders of Keurig Coffee. And he has now set up a company that invests in other companies that have committed to giving generously to the
Yeah.
poor. So there is kind of an effect of that. Chris Stevens was one of our first folks and inspiring in that way because of what you just said. I want to do things just to help others in this business, not so much generate revenue for myself. But Brandon, I wanted to follow up with you about that. The highest form of giving is telling truth. I love that concept, and that, of course, gets us back to what Paul said to Timothy, about focusing on the life that really is life. So, as we wrap up our discussion today, I want to ask you when your clients come to you at Conscious Wealth Man or Conscious Wealth Investment and say, "Hey, I'm a Christian capitalist. I'm a Christian. I'm a small business owner, or I'm a business executive, and I want to give generously to the poor." As a result of the wealth I've accumulated. When someone says something like that, what does that mean to you?
So I've been thinking a lot about Christian capitalists I've been getting ready for this podcast, and I think there's like two stories that stick out in the New Testament about Christianity and money, or Jesus and money.
Mm-hmm.
What are
What are they?
what are the two that come to mind for
we've
you?
got we've got a bunch. But the two that jump to mind are the ones that I think about when, as a pastor, I'm reading the gospel to my congregation on a Sunday morning, and it
Yep,
includes people who have built wealth by
yep,
helping others build wealth. Right, so
yep,
they're financial advisors in many ways, very similar to the profession that you've developed. The first and one of the most famous is Jesus telling the rich young ruler that in order for you to get into heaven and to inherit the kingdom of heaven, you have to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And the rich man
yeah,
goes away sad because he has so much. Right after that, Jesus says it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of the needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. So those two kind of double whammies right there in the gospel are ones that I think people kind of focus on when it comes to Jesus and money. They're negative. There's a whole lot more positive in the book, but those are two that jump to mind. How about you?
So the eye of the needle one's interesting to me, and that's what I was thinking about as I was driving this week. And so I was educated by Jesuits, and they taught us that the eye of the needle, like if you actually think about a camel through the eye of a needle, it's kind of a grotesque thought. It's impossible,
Right.
and it's an extreme. But then when we were taught was that the eye of the needle is actually um, was a very famous intersection in a market. So I
Right.
was
In
just in
Jerusalem.
Morocco,
Yeah.
in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so I was just in Morocco, and of course I lived in the Middle East, and you have these like intersections with all these side streets that come into this main hub, and everybody's in there, and there's people on the ground selling spices and all that. And the idea is somehow you've got to get a camel through the eye of the needle. And so what if what he was really saying is that you need to navigate commerce and Christianity? What if you need, or in life, or these ideas of being in the world or not of it, and being able to navigate having money but not being attached to it,
Mm-hmm.
and navigating capitalism, which is a flawed system but is the system and reality that we have today, in a way that's loving, kind, and generous to not only ourselves, our workers, but our employees. What if that's it?
I think that's very much it. I love the way that you just summarized the Christian capitalist concept, because that is one of the ways that you can work through that parable. Is that it refers to? I've heard folks describe it as the Jesuits did, as an intersection. Others have described it as an archway or a gate through the one of the main outside walls in Jerusalem that a camel could get through, but only with a lot of effort. And so the rich man getting into heaven is not impossible because Jesus says right after that, all things are possible, right? All things are possible with God. What is what, you mentioned that there were two that kind of jumped to mind: the camel and the eye of the needle. And what was the other one? Do you recall?
The other one is the temple one, where he
Yeah.
And I understand, I understand classical interpretation of that. And I'm not saying I understand, but I think of it a different way for myself. Um, I think of it like an Italian at the Olive Garden. Like if you like
You fill up on the
took a guy,
breadsticks before dinner?
like if you took a guy from Florence and brought him to the U.S. and you'd be like, hey, I have an Italian restaurant I want to take you to. He might throw tables over and throw breadsticks.
Right.
And so I wonder, and to some extent, I don't wonder. I think if it were, I think it would be fun to think about. Maybe in that case, Jesus is just upset about bad business. Like this is bad business.
Yeah.
I know it's classically interpreted. You're doing this, making money off of my father and all that, and I don't disagree with that. But for me, because I love good business so much, I love business that serves other people. That I love work that brings out my highest potential and brings out the highest potential and really gets into the purpose of the people I work with. And so then I just wonder, well, what would it be like if he was just like, this is bad business. This is the Olive Garden.
I love that, Brandon. And it's so funny you say that. In a way, I think that your interpretation is spot on, because Jesus is saying it is bad business to not be loving, kind, and generous. The tables that he's overturning there were people who were exploiting the poor. And his whole point was, if you're going to be in business, be loving, kind, and generous when you
add value.
Folks.
And add value.
Right.
If you can't add value, then why are you here?
Right.
Why are you doing this business? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say on that note, you have added a ton of value to our conversation about generous giving and hard work and how we manage the blessings that God has given us. Thank you so much for joining us today. I sure
Thanks
do
for having
appreciate
me,
it.
Rich. This has been fun.
It has been fun. I look forward to seeing you again soon. You have a great day.
Right.
Good luck with the move. We'll be praying for you.
Thank you.
See you again soon on the Christian Capitalist Podcast, where the more we make, the more we give.